They say history is written by survivors. But sometimes, history is also written by those who survived something so terrifying, so unnatural, that they could only describe it with shaking hands and fading memories. In the dusty corners of ancient libraries, in fading maps drawn by trembling cartographers, and in legends whispered at the edges of the known world, there exists a creature that should not exist. A creature that appears everywhere, yet belongs nowhere. A creature so anatomically impossible that its very existence feels like a biological scream against nature. And yet, everyone drew it. Everyone described it. Civilizations separated by oceans, deserts, empires, and millennia all reported the same being, a towering giant with no head atop its shoulders, whose face, eyes, nose, and mouth was embedded directly into its chest. They called them many names: the Blemmyes, the Asaphili, the chest-faced men, the Headless Watchers. But the name didn't matter. What mattered was the shape. The same impossible shape, drawn again and again and again. Tonight, we're going to step inside that darkness. We're going to walk into the places ancient people feared to approach, but still chose to document. We're going to retrace the footsteps of explorers who insisted these beings were real, even when it cost them their credibility, their sanity, or their lives. And we're going to ask the question no historian wants to ask out loud. How did civilizations that never met all describe the same nightmare? Our journey begins long before maps became reliable, before kingdoms formed borders, before humans believed the world had limits. Our journey begins in the most cinematic place imaginable: the edges of the known world. The places ancient people mapped not with accuracy, but with fear. The blank spaces where monsters were drawn not as decoration, but as warning. For the Greeks, that edge was Libya, a region they barely understood but deeply feared, and it was there, in that hot, endless desert, that Herodotus recorded something chilling. He didn't write it like a myth. He didn't label it with poetry or metaphor. He wrote it with the cold, observational tone of a man documenting the natural world. He claimed tribes of headless men roamed the desert, their eyes glowing from their chests, their mouths stretching unnaturally across their ribcage. Why would the father of history, a man whose reputation depended on accuracy, write something so impossible? Some say Herodotus was gullible. Others say he recorded propaganda from travelers. But these explanations collapse when we see what came next, because hundreds of years later, Pliny the Elder, Rome's greatest natural historian, repeated the same description. Pliny's natural history was not a book of fairy tales. It was the Roman Empire's encyclopedia of life. Soldiers, explorers, physicians, and governors used it as a reference for understanding the world they conquered. Pliny described the Blemmyes with such precise anatomical detail that modern scholars remain baffled. Eyes placed where the clavicles meet, a mouth dividing the upper sternum, a musculature designed to support such a configuration. This wasn't mythology, this wasn't metaphor, this was documentation. The Romans placed the Blemmyes on their maps. Arab geographers placed them on theirs. Medieval monks illuminated them in gold and ink. Chinese travelers referenced them. Indian storytellers warned of them. And pre-Columbian tribes told stories of similar figures stalking the forests at night. It's as if the entire world remembered something and then tried very hard to forget. To understand the terror behind these drawings, you need to imagine the mindset of an ancient traveler. The world wasn't connected. There were no satellites, no global trade, no knowledge of distant continents. Every journey into the unknown was a brush with death. When someone returned, the people listened. And when multiple travelers from different eras described the same impossible being, their words carved themselves into the collective memory of civilization. But here's where the story becomes cinematic, because this isn't just a historical puzzle, it's a horror story carved into stone. 1,000 years after Herodotus and Pliny, during the medieval period, Europe was plunged into superstition and dread. Monasteries, the only centers of knowledge, became safe havens from a world filled with war, plague, and chaos. Monks spent their lives preserving old texts, and in those ancient pages they found the same disturbing creature again and again. Imagine a quiet stone room lit only by candlelight. A monk sits hunched over a manuscript, tracing the ink of an older writer who claims to have seen headless men. He does not question it, he believes it, because the older the text, the more sacred the truth. And so he paints what he has read, a giant man, tall and muscular, with a face embedded in its torso. He paints it clearly, carefully, dutifully, because he believes he is not illustrating fantasy, but warning posterity.
Fast forward to the age of exploration, when fear meets ambition. The New World opened like a wound, raw and unfamiliar. Explorers reported creatures never imagined by Europeans. Jaguars, tapirs, electric eels, anacondas, birds with impossible colors. Strange became normal. But then came something that terrified even them. Something only one man dared to write about. Sir Walter Raleigh. In 1596, Raleigh published The Discovery of Guiana, a book that shocked England. He described a tribe whose faces were positioned on their chests. He even pinpointed their location, the river banks of the Kawanara region. He wasn't guessing. He insisted he spoke to locals who had seen them. His claim was so convincing that one of the era's greatest cartographers, Eudoxus Hondius, placed the Headless tribe on his official map of South America. Let that sink in. Not on a fantasy map, not in a legend, on a navigational map used by explorers. And then silence. After appearing for 2,000 years of documented history, the Headless giants vanish. No more sightings, no more maps, no more witnesses. Nothing. It's as if they were suddenly scrubbed from reality. So what happened? There are many theories, none of them comforting.
One theory is biological, that the creatures did exist, but were a separate, evolutionary offshoot that humanity wiped out. After all, early humans eliminated Neanderthals. Why not another species? Many archaeologists believe prehistoric Earth hosted far more hominids than modern textbooks admit. Some species left no bones, no fossils, no traces. The jungle eats everything. The desert buries everything. The ocean erases everything. If a branch of humanity evolved in isolation, tall, muscular, anatomically unique, ancient people might have encountered them in remote lands, misunderstood them, feared them, remembered them, then, slowly, inevitably, wiped them out. Another theory is psychological, that the headless giant is a symbol of the ultimate fear, losing one's identity. In nearly every culture, the head represents the self, reason, memory, soul. A being without a head is a being without autonomy. Many ancient societies experienced cultural annihilation, conquered, enslaved, stripped of memory. The headless creature could represent a civilization that has lost itself. But that theory fails to explain something too specific to ignore. If this was an archetype, why is the anatomy always the same? Why do the eyes always appear just below the shoulders? Why is the mouth always broad and horizontal? Why the height? Why the muscular build? Why the geographic clustering around remote frontiers? Psychology cannot explain that level of consistency. The darkest theory, however, is the prehistoric memory hypothesis. This theory suggests that early humans did not walk Earth alone, that in the deep prehistory, tens of thousands of years before writing, humanity encountered something else, something human-like, but not human, something strong, tall, terrifying, something that lived far from early settlements, in jungles, deserts, mountains, something that ancient humans mythologized after it disappeared. This would explain the global consistency, the fear, the anatomical detail, the geographic isolation, the collective silence after their disappearance. But what could erase an entire species so completely that only myths remain? Disease? Climate change? Human warfare? Or something unnatural? Extinction, or into hiding so deep that no modern eye has seen them. But deep in the Amazon, tribes still speak of figures with faces in their chests. In parts of East Africa, elders whisper about tall beings that once lived near the mountains. In remote India, stories persist about watchers with no heads who roam at night. Are these simply echoes of ancient myths, or remnants of something older than civilization? Imagine a species that evolved alongside us. Imagine it surviving long enough for humans to encounter it. Imagine it being strong enough that early humans feared it. Imagine it being rare, isolated, almost mythical. Imagine the last few dying in the shadows of unexplored lands. Imagine their memory living on as monsters. Now imagine something even worse. What if we erased them? Humanity has a long history of destroying what it fears. From megafauna to rival tribes to entire cultures, extinction follows us like a shadow. And if early humans encountered a rival species, powerful but rare, the outcome may have been inevitable. But what if they didn't go extinct? What if they changed? What if they hid? What if the disappearance from maps doesn't mean disappearance from Earth? What if the silence is not because they vanished, but because someone wanted them erased from memory? This brings us to a chilling pattern in historical documents. Around the 17th century, monstrous races begin disappearing from scholarly texts. Maps become sanitized. Explorers stop reporting strange creatures. Mythological beings are labeled as errors. Entire categories of early natural history are rewritten. It is almost as if the world suddenly decided these things are not allowed to exist. Who made that decision? Scholars? Governments? Institutions? Or was it simply the rise of Enlightenment rationalism crushing the ancient world's openness to mystery? Or maybe, just maybe, the creatures themselves withdrew. Think of the cinematic tension. The jungles of the New World were vast, impenetrable, filled with shadow. Colonialism pushed deeper and deeper into these frontiers. Mining, farming, settlement, all carved into lands once untouched. If a species survived in rare pockets, humanity's expansion might have pushed them into obscurity. Now imagine this final cinematic moment. You stand in a dense rainforest at dusk. The canopy is thick, the air heavy. Every direction looks the same. You hear footsteps, heavy, deliberate. Not animal, too measured. Not human, too large. You feel eyes on you, from a height that does not match a head, from the level of a broad, towering chest. You turn, but the forest swallows everything. Was it imagination, or memory, or something watching from just beyond the trees? In the end, we are left with a mystery that refuses to die. Every ancient civilization remembered the headless giants. Every ancient explorer feared them. Every ancient mapmaker recorded them. And then history fell silent. But silence is not evidence of absence. It is evidence of something waiting. The question is not, did the headless giants exist? The real question is, why did the world work so hard to forget them? And perhaps an even darker question, what else have we forgotten?